I wasn't planning to tell this story. Honestly, I thought I'd bury it with the other pieces of my past I chained to myself and locked behind a door. But everything changed the day my coworker decided to put on a show. And he did it right in front of the company's top executives, the people whose signatures can alter someone's career for decades. In the moment the room went quiet and the laughter hit me in the back, I realized the thing I'd spent my whole life running from was walking straight toward me, and there was no exit, no shelter, only a moment where you either stand tall or they break you. I'm 34. I work as a systems analyst in a large corporation, and people often say, he's ordinary, he's quiet, he just does his job. I don't argue. I spent years trying to be as unnoticed as possible, to be the kind of person people forget as soon as he leaves the room. Calm, invisible, safe, for everyone else and for myself. And it worked, until that day. But Scott, he was the complete opposite. Loud, sharp-tongued, always the center of attention, the kind of guy who laughs first and loudest, even when the joke is about someone else, especially when that someone else is me. His jokes were called harmless, but only by people who had never been the target. Hey, Mike, you could use some sun. Mike, you look like you're always ready to disappear. Mike, relax. You look like a guy who writes reports even in his sleep. People laughed. I even smiled sometimes just so I wouldn't show irritation. I'm not confrontational. That's part of my mask. I don't argue. Don't snap back. Don't react. It's safer that way. But even those who hide well get nervous before big meetings. The corporate board was visiting in person. People we usually only see in the annual report photos. We had a presentation. Scott was handling the section on new implementations, and I had the technical summary. I'd prepared for 2 weeks, double-checked the data, but even then I felt that familiar cold under my ribs. I was standing by the table, flipping through folders, while the others filled the conference room. Scott walked in last, confident stride, like he was walking onto a stage, not into a meeting. He slapped my shoulder. Ready? Try not to fall asleep during your own part. Someone snorted. I clenched my teeth. It's fine, I answered calmly. Everyone has their role. Yeah, he grinned. You're our hero of the quiet corners. I pretended not to hear. The room filled with leadership, people in expensive suits, neat tablets, short professional greetings. A guest consultant entered, tall, gray-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple dark suit. He didn't look around, just sat down and quietly wrote something in his notebook. I didn't think much of it. Back then I didn't know who he was. The meeting went fine until it was my turn. I stood up, turned on the slides, started speaking. My voice was steady, emotionless, calm. I always did it that way. Neutral delivery, strict facts, no theatrics. But halfway through a sentence, I heard a muffled chuckle. Scott. I tried to ignore it. He whispered to the guy next to him, We're all going to fall asleep, guys. Someone remind him this is a presentation, not an interrogation. A couple of people snickered. Some just looked down. I kept talking, but my hands trembled slightly. I took a breath, pulled myself together, and that's when Scott decided he needed more. He raised his voice. Michael, have you ever spoken louder than a whisper? You look like you're going into battle, not presenting. Although, he paused, you're definitely not fit for a battlefield. The room froze. The executives stared at him, confused. He continued, pleased with himself. I can imagine it now. Michael with his papers on the front line. Excuse me, dear enemy forces. I have a report. Laughter burst out, sharp, loud, way too much. I stood in front of the screen, holding the pointer, feeling something inside me tighten into a hard knot. I looked like a kid whose chair was pulled out from under him. I heard laughter from people who didn't even know my full name. Heard someone say, Damn, Scott, that's harsh. And someone else add, Come on, Mike won't mind, he's made of steel. No, I just forgot how to show that it hurts. I slowly lowered my hand with the pointer. My voice caught in my throat. My eyes scanned the executives, some confused, some annoyed, one trying to mask discomfort. But there was one person who wasn't laughing, wasn't looking away, wasn't moving. The gray-haired consultant. He was watching me, expectantly, attentively, as if trying to see something behind my mask. Not contempt, not pity, something else. I looked away, but something stirred inside. Scott wasn't done. "Relax, Mike. It's just jokes. You're our guy with no nerves. What was it you said? Everyone does their own job. Maybe your job is to stay quiet." I stood still, but inside rose that feeling I'd been bearing for years. Thin, sharp, like a cold blade under the ribs. It wasn't anger. It was memory, a reminder. And then the gray-haired consultant lifted his head, closed his notebook, and said my name the way no one had said it in years. The moment he said my name, the room shifted. Not physically, but the way people breathed, the way chairs stopped creaking, the way eyes slid toward him as if pulled by gravity. He didn't say it like a coworker reading a badge. He said it like a man calling someone back from a different life. "Michael Hale." His voice was deep, steady, worn smooth by years of command. My stomach tightened. It had been a long time since anyone pronounced my last name that way. Clipped, precise, military. Scott smirked, still riding the high of his own joke. "Oh, careful," he said loudly. "We woke the statue." But no one laughed with him this time. The consultant, tall, weathered, posture impossibly straight, set his pen down with deliberate quiet. He didn't look at Scott. He didn't look at anyone but me. "You've changed," he said softly, almost like he was talking to himself. My pulse kicked against my ribs. I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in over 10 years, but once you've heard a voice like that, in sandstorms, in blackout nights, in moments where one wrong step ends everything, you don't forget. It sits in your bones. Scott raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you two know each other?" he asked with mock innocence. "Let me guess. He fixed your printer once." A few people shifted uncomfortably. The silence had texture now. Thick, uneasy. Executives exchanged quick glances. They weren't sure what they were witnessing, but they knew it wasn't normal workplace banter anymore. The older man ignored Scott completely. "Michael," he repeated, "look at me." It wasn't a request. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Gray, alert, same as back then. He studied me for a long, unbearable second. Then he exhaled. Slow, almost relieved. "I didn't expect to ever see you off the field," he said. "Not alive, anyway." A murmur rippled through the room. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, but the past arrived too fast. Dust, metal, shouting, the metallic smell of blood. I steadied my breathing the way therapists had taught me. Quiet, controlled, don't let the memories pull you back. But Scott, he doubled down. "Oh, come on," he said, laughing. "What field? The filing field? The spreadsheet battlefield?" He looked around, waiting for support. No one gave him any. The consultant finally turned his head. Slowly, like a predator deciding whether to address the noise behind him. "What's your name?" he asked Scott. Scott straightened, puffing up. "Scott Miller, Senior Implementation Lead." The older man nodded once. "Well, Scott Miller," he said with calm precision, "you should never speak about a man's service when you know nothing about the ground beneath his boots." Scott scoffed. "Oh, please. What service? Michael can barely raise his voice. You expect me to believe he—" But the consultant didn't let him finish. "He saved 12 of my men," he said. Simple, direct, final. Every person in that room froze. My lungs forgot to work. He continued, voice steady as steel. 12, under fire, in pitch darkness, with communications down. He carried 2 of them on his shoulders while bleeding from his own shoulder. And he went back. 3 times, for the rest. My vision blurred at the edges. I didn't want this. I didn't want the room to know. I didn't want this part of me dragged into fluorescent light and corporate air conditioning. I forced myself to swallow, to breathe, to stay present. Scott's face paled, his smirk dissolving. But the consultant wasn't finished. "You think quiet means weak?" he asked him. "You think humility means fear?" He leaned back, eyes sharp. "Son, the most dangerous men I've ever commanded didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to." No one moved. Even the executives sat perfectly still. Scott attempted a shaky laugh. "Look, I didn't mean... It was just... "A joke?" The older man cut in. He turned to the executives. "I'd classify it differently. Unprofessional. Disrespectful. Borderline harassment." The VP of Operations shifted forward in his chair. HR glanced down at her tablet, scrolling rapidly. Something about the room had changed. Direction, weight, allegiance. It was clear. Lines were being drawn, and Scott was suddenly standing on the wrong side. My hands were cold, but my spine felt strangely warm. A heat I hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not vindication. Something quieter. Something long overdue. The consultant looked back at me. "You still go by Michael?" he asked gently. I nodded once. He gave the faintest smile, just a flicker, and then said words I never expected to hear again. "That's not what we called you." My breath hitched. Scott frowned. "Called him what?" The older man didn't take his eyes off me. "He earned a name," he said. "One we didn't give out lightly." Time slowed. Every sound in the room faded. He finally spoke the words, "Angel of Death." A shocked silence detonated across the room like a pressure wave. The executives stared. HR froze mid-scroll. Scott took half a step back. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, and I felt years of buried memory clawing at the edges of my composure. I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought I'd buried that part of me forever. But that wasn't even the moment everything truly changed. For a moment no one spoke. Not even the air seemed willing to move. Angel of Death wasn't a nickname. It was a weight, a shadow, a history most people in this building couldn't imagine. And now it floated in the middle of a corporate conference room like a live wire. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, searching, recalibrating. Some held confusion, others fear. A few held something like respect. But the only eyes I avoided were my own reflection in the black screen of the monitor. I didn't want to see the past staring back. Scott broke first. Okay, what the hell is going on?" he stammered, his voice brittle instead of smug. "This is ridiculous. You're telling me he jabbed a finger toward me, is some kind of killer?" The consultant didn't flinch. "No, I'm telling you he's the reason a dozen families still have fathers, husbands, brothers." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And you, mocking him like he's weak? That's not just ignorance. That's arrogance." HR's director cleared her throat carefully, choosing each word like she was diffusing a mine. "Mr. Miller, I'll need you to refrain from commenting further. This is now a formal matter." A formal matter? The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Scott swallowed hard. The VP of Operations shifted, turning his attention to me with a seriousness I'd only seen during merger announcements or stockholder disasters. "Michael," he said quietly, "we had no idea about your military background." "I preferred it that way," I replied, my voice low but steady. "I came here to work, not to be a story." The consultant nodded as if that answer confirmed something for him. He spoke again, this time to the entire room. "You think he's quiet because he's timid?" He shook his head. "No, he's quiet because he's seen what happens when people talk too much and act too little." Someone exhaled sharply across the table. Scott tried to regain ground. "Look, I didn't know. If he's got, whatever, some classified past, that's not my fault. I was just messing around. People make jokes. It's normal." The consultant turned slowly toward him. "What you did wasn't normal. It was targeted, persistent. The kind of behavior I used to remove from my units before it cost lives." The VP nodded. "Agreed. And based on the messages HR already has on file," He tapped the table. Your behavior has been an ongoing issue. Scott blinked. What messages? HR sighed, opening her tablet. There have been 6 separate complaints in the last 9 months. Comments about coworkers, undermining behavior, inappropriate jokes. She paused. And 3 specifically mentioning you singling out Michael. My stomach dropped. I didn't know about any of those. People reported him for me? The consultant looked at me with a knowing expression. You made an impact without realizing it. Men like you usually do. Scott threw up his hands. So what? You're going to take their word over mine? Over a few jokes? Come on. This is blown way out of proportion. The VP leaned back, clasping his hands. This is no longer about jokes. It's about character. Scott opened his mouth again, but his voice cracked, or instead of projecting. That's not fair. The consultant's reply was instantaneous. Neither was humiliating a man you didn't understand. The room went still. A strange quiet settled then, not awkward but decisive, like a collective turning of a page. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz softer. HR cleared her throat again. Scott, we're placing you on immediate leave pending review. His face drained. What? No, you can't. This is insane. But the VP was already standing. This meeting is over. Michael, we'll reschedule your presentation at a later time. For now, take the rest of the day. I nodded stiffly, not trusting myself to speak. People gathered their things slowly, like they didn't want to make noise. Some glanced at me with new eyes, not pity, not fear, something like reverence. That made me more uncomfortable than anything else. The consultant remained seated until the room emptied. When I finally dared to look at him, he gave me a faint, quiet smile. The kind a commanding officer gives a soldier whose name is carved into memory. You carried a lot alone, he said, longer than you should have. I swallowed. I didn't want it following me. It didn't, he said. You carried it with you. His words hit harder than Scott's ever could. He stood and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. A gesture that transported years back. Different sand, different sky, different kind of silence. You did good, Hale. You lived your life. You built something calm. There's honor in that. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. For the first time in a decade, my past didn't feel like a burden. It felt like truth. He nodded toward the hallway. Walk with me. There's something I need to tell you. And I had no idea that conversation would change everything that came after. We walked down the hallway in silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy anymore, just honest. The consultant moved with the same controlled confidence I remembered from years ago, even if neither of us wore the same uniform now. The office air smelled like coffee and printers instead of dust and diesel, but something in my chest felt exactly like it had. Back then, alert, steady, grounded. When we reached an empty break room, he closed the door behind us and leaned against the counter. I didn't mean to expose you, he said quietly, but I wasn't going to let that boy tear you down. I shook my head. You didn't expose me. You just reminded me of who I used to be. He studied me for a long second. Used to be? His voice softened. Son, you didn't lose that man. You just stopped needing him every day. I looked down at my hands. Steady, clean, not stained like they were in memory. I didn't want to be that person anymore, I admitted. I didn't want the violence. I didn't want the stories. I didn't want people looking at me like I was something dangerous. And how did you want them to look at you? He asked. I thought about it. Like I'm normal, I said. Like I'm just a guy doing his job. He nodded slowly. You are normal, but you're also exceptional. Those things aren't opposites, Hale. They're chapters. I exhaled. You always talk like that? He grinned. Only when I mean it. We both laughed. Quiet but real. It felt like the first time in years that laughing didn't taste bitter. He picked up a paper cup, spun it between his fingers. You know, men like Scott, we saw their type in the service too. Loud, needing an audience, needed to feel big. I nodded. And men like me? He smiled again, but there was weight in it. Men like you kept them alive. I didn't know what to say. Compliments never sat well with me. Praise was something I'd learned to deflect, not accept. But this time I let the words land, just once, without pushing them away. He glanced at the clock. HR will deal with him. You don't need to worry about the fallout. I'm not, I said. I'm just tired. The tiredness means you've been carrying too much alone, he replied. Let this be the day you put it down. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't running from my past. I was letting it rest. He straightened, ready to leave. You ever need anything, you reach out. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You don't owe me, I said. He looked at me with that same commander's gaze I remembered from the desert night. He pulled us all out of hell. Then let's call it respect. He tapped my shoulder once, firm, grounding, and walked out. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the hum of the vending machine, and for the first time since joining the company, the silence didn't feel like hiding. It felt like peace. The next few weeks moved quickly. HR conducted their investigation. People came forward, some I barely remembered talking to, sharing small things Scott had said or done. He'd built a reputation without realizing it, and it finally caught up with him. By the end of the month, he was quietly reassigned to a low-impact department across the city. No more presentations, no more junior employees to impress, no audience left to laugh at his jokes. He didn't try to speak to me. He didn't look at me in the halls. He just disappeared from my orbit. Retribution didn't come with fireworks. It came clean, quiet, inevitable. Peace isn't loud. Meanwhile, the executives asked to meet with me. This time the room wasn't tense. No eyes watching for weakness. No jokes waiting in the corners. The VP smiled when I walked in. Michael, he said, we'd like to offer you a new role, lead systems architect. It's more responsibility, more autonomy, and, he paused, more respect. Not because of what we learned about your past, but because of the composure, professionalism, and character you've shown every day. I felt something shift inside. Not pride, permission. I'll take it, I said simply. His smile widened. Knew you would. I settled into the new position naturally. People spoke to me differently now, not cautiously, but with a kind of earned regard. Not because of the name the commander had spoken, but because of the way I carried myself afterward. Sometimes, respect arrives only after you stop chasing invisibility. One evening, weeks after everything calmed down, I stayed late to finish a network audit. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to fear. Not tonight. As I packed my bag, I saw my reflection in the dark window. No uniform, no sand, no rifle, just me, Michael Hale. Not the angel of death, not the ghost of a man who once survived things he didn't talk about. Not the shadow Scott tried to shrink. Just a man who rebuilt his life brick by brick, choosing peace over noise, choosing dignity over attention. I walked out into the cool night, letting the automatic doors slide shut behind me. The world didn't feel heavy anymore. They thought burying my past would make me weak. Instead, it made room for who I became. And as I headed toward my car, I realized something simple, something steady. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't running. I wasn't shrinking. I was home.